The road out of Jerusalem does not descend gently. It breaks apart. It plunges. It tears through the limestone cliffs of the Kidron Valley like a wound in the earth. And on one terrible night, somewhere around 980 BCE, the most powerful man in the ancient Near East walked it barefoot. He was not being escorted. He was not wearing his crown. He was not surrounded by the gleaming iron of his royal guard. He was weeping. His head was covered in dust and ash, the ancient sign of mourning, of ruin, of a soul that has been stripped of everything. Behind him, a great city burned with conspiracy. Before him, an open wilderness stretched without mercy. His name was David, son of Jesse, shepherd boy, warrior, poet, conqueror of Goliath, king of Israel and Judah, a man who had defeated lions with his bare hands, toppled armies with a stone, and built an empire from the dust of the Judean hills. And tonight, he was running for his life, not from a foreign enemy, not from the Philistines, not from the armies of any rival nation. He was running from his own son. What happens to a man, a king, in a moment like that? What words could possibly emerge from a soul so broken? 3,000 years later, we still know the answer. To understand Psalm 23, we must first understand the man who wrote it. And to understand the man, we must go back to the beginning, not to the palace, not to the throne room, not to the battlefield glittering with bronze and blood. We must go to the hills. The region of Bethlehem, in the ancient territory of Judah, sits approximately 800 meters above sea level on the spine of the Judean highlands. From those hills, on a clear day, you can see the distant shimmer of the Dead Sea to the east, a great salt mirror glinting below the horizon, 400 meters below sea level, the lowest point on the face of the earth. Between these two extremes, the landscape folds and twists into gullies and ridges, rocky terraces and sudden drops, wadi beds that run dry in summer and rage with flash floods in winter. This is where David grew up. This is the landscape that shaped him. He was the youngest of 8 sons, born to a man named Jesse. And in the ancient world, youngest sons inherited the least of everything. The oldest sons trained for war, traded in the marketplaces, sat in the councils of men. The youngest son got the flock. Day after day, season after season, from boyhood into adolescence, David walked behind the sheep of his father's household across the barren Judean wilderness. He learned that what looked like a wasteland from a distance was, on closer inspection, alive with possibility. He learned to read the land, to understand where the morning dew collected in the shadows of limestone outcroppings, where a few blades of green grass pushed through the thin soil after rain, where a quiet spring ran clear beneath a ridge, and where a sudden thunderstorm could turn a dry ravine into a killing current. He also learned fear. In those hills, predators moved. Lions were not yet extinct in ancient Canaan. Bears came down from the forested heights of Gilead and Bashan to the north. And the shepherd, a boy alone on the hillside with nothing but a wooden rod and a leather sling, was all that stood between the flock and destruction. The ancient record tells us something extraordinary. David did not run from these encounters. He ran toward them. He killed a lion. He killed a bear. He did it with his own hands, dragging the lamb from between the predator's teeth, trusting something deeper than his own strength. He was, by any modern psychological reckoning, forming the deepest theology of his life, not in a temple or a schoolroom, but on a hillside, alone, in the dark. He was learning what it meant to be held by a shepherd greater than himself. This is the soul that would one day write the most beloved poem in human history. But first, that soul would have to be shattered completely. The story of David's ascent reads like something written by a playwright who loved both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. He came to the attention of the prophet Samuel while, still a teenager, overlooked, sunburned, and smelling of sheep. When Samuel arrived at the household of Jesse to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse paraded 7 sons before him. 7. Not one of them was chosen. The prophet had to ask, almost incredulously, "Are these all the sons you have?" And Jesse replied, almost as an afterthought, "Well, There is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep. He was brought in from the field, and immediately the ancient text says, "The word came, 'Rise and anoint him.' This is the one." The shepherd boy was anointed king, not yet crowned, not yet enthroned, but marked by something invisible and irrevocable. And the road from that anointing to the palace ran straight through the valley of the shadow of death. He fought Goliath. He served in the court of Saul, the troubled first king of Israel, a man who swung between adoration and murderous jealousy. He spent years as a fugitive, hiding in limestone caves across the Judean wilderness, the caves of Adullam, the wilderness of En-Gedi, the desert cliffs that plunged toward the Dead Sea, hunted by a king who had once loved him like a son. He was a man who had known what it was to sleep on cold rock, to eat in darkness, to lead a band of broken men through terrain that could kill as casually as a sword. And then, against every probability, he survived. He was crowned king in Hebron at the age of 30. He ruled first over Judah, then, after years of civil war, over all 12 tribes of Israel. He conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites, established it as his capital, brought the Ark of the Covenant up the mountain in a procession of celebration so jubilant that he himself danced in the streets. He was, by the standards of the ancient world, a colossus. And then came the fault lines, adultery, murder by proxy, the terrible cycle of consequence that followed. A daughter assaulted, a son who avenged her outside the law, another son, beautiful, ambitious, calculating, who began to weave the most intricate betrayal in ancient history. His name was Absalom. Absalom was everything a dynasty, feared and a father, loved. He was physically magnificent. The ancient record says that from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet, there was no blemish in him. His hair was so extraordinary that when he cut it once a year, it weighed 200 shekels by the royal standard. He stood at the crossroads of Jerusalem and charmed the people of Israel with a politician's precision, stealing their hearts from his own father, one grievance at a time. For 4 years, he cultivated his conspiracy. He traveled to Hebron, the southern city that had been David's original seat of power, and raised the flag of rebellion there. The word spread through the kingdom with shocking speed. The ancient text records that David's spy network brought him the news in a single phrase that must have landed like a spear thrust. The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. What David did next was not what we would expect from a warrior king. He did not reach for his sword. He did not rally his armies. He ran. "Come," he said to his servants, "we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom." The evacuation of Jerusalem was a scene of devastation. The king, his household, his loyal soldiers, barefoot, heads covered in the ash of mourning, streaming out of the city gates, down through the Kidron Valley, up the winding road that climbed the Mount of Olives to the east. The biblical account gives us a detail that stops the breath. As they climbed the Mount of Olives, David wept. His head was covered. He was walking barefoot on the gravel and limestone, and the people with him wept too. A whole procession of grief moving through the landscape of his greatest victories. At the top of the Mount of Olives, where the road broke over the ridge and the wilderness opened before them, he paused. Below him, behind him, lay Jerusalem, his city, the city he had conquered, the city he had wept with joy to enter when he brought the ark home, the city where his children were born. He was leaving it in the hands of the son he still loved. Imagine what it means to be David at this moment. He is not simply a king in flight. He is a father betrayed by his child. He is a man who, in his darkest midnight hours of self-reflection, knows that the seeds of this catastrophe were planted in his own moral failures. The ancient prophets had told him as much, that the sword would never leave his house, that betrayal would rise from within his own family. He had been warned, and now the warning had arrived, not as words on a scroll, but as an army marching behind the face of his beloved son. He crosses the Jordan River with a band of exhausted loyalists and makes for the city of Mahanaim, a name that means, with devastating irony, 2 camps. Israel had been split in two. David held one side, Absalom held the other. And in that holding camp, that exile shelter, that place of radical uncertainty, somewhere between the safety of Mahanaim and the memory of Jerusalem, scholars and theologians have long proposed that David picked up his pen and he wrote the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Consider what it means to say these words as a fugitive king. David had known what it was to be a shepherd, to understand the vulnerability of the sheep, their absolute dependence, their tendency to wander into danger, their inability to save themselves. He had also known what it was to be a king, to carry the weight of an entire nation's safety upon his own shoulders, to be the one whom others depended on. Now, stripped of his throne and his city, he collapsed both identities into one breathtaking declaration. I am the sheep. God is the shepherd. The word he uses for Lord here is the divine covenant name, Yahweh, the deeply personal, intimate name of God that the ancient Hebrews used to describe not an abstract deity, but a relational one, the God who makes promises, the God who shows up. And the word for shepherd, roeh in Hebrew, was not merely an agricultural term. In the entire ancient Near East, from the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia to the courts of the Egyptian pharaohs, the image of the shepherd king was the supreme metaphor for divine and royal power. The hieroglyph for ruler in ancient Egypt was literally the image of a shepherd's crook. Hammurabi, the great Babylonian lawgiver, called himself the salvation-bearing shepherd whose staff is straight. David was inverting the entire political theology of the ancient world. Every other king claimed to be the shepherd over the people. David was saying, I am the sheep. There is a shepherd above me. And because of that, I shall not want for anything. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. These are not the green meadows of a European pastoral painting. This is critical to understand. The Judean wilderness, the landscape David walked as a boy, the landscape he was now fleeing through as a man, is not lush. In the rainy season, from November to March, thin blades of grass push through the stony soil in the shadow of rocks where moisture is trapped. A flock can graze there, but only just. Each day provides enough and no more. The shepherd must search actively, must know the land intimately, must lead the flock to each small pocket of sustenance. And water in the ancient Near East was a matter of life and death. Sheep cannot drink from rushing streams. A frightened sheep that steps into fast-moving water will panic. Its heavy fleece will saturate, and it will drown in a current that barely rises above a man's knee. The shepherd had to find the still waters, the quiet pools, the cisterns, the springs that ran slow and clear. Only there could the flock drink in safety. David, writing this in exile, was not describing a fantasy. He was describing a memory, and through that memory, a promise. The same God who had navigated him through every wilderness of his past would navigate him through this one. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The Hebrew word for restores, nashav, carries within it the image of turning back, of retrieval. It is the image of a sheep that has wandered off the path, that has become cast, a term shepherds still use today to describe a sheep that has rolled onto its back and cannot right itself, lying helpless, its legs cycling uselessly in the air, until the shepherd comes and lifts it back onto its feet. David, the greatest king of ancient Israel, a man who had committed adultery, engineered murder, failed his children in ways that were now consuming his legacy, was the cast sheep. And he was declaring that the shepherd had not abandoned him, that the shepherd was, even now, coming across the hillside to set him right. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Here we reach the center of the psalm, its beating heart. And to feel the full weight of this verse, we must see it not as metaphor, but as geography. The phrase "valley of the shadow of death" in the original Hebrew is tsalmawet, a compound word meaning deep darkness, a darkness so profound it resembles death itself. In the literal landscape of the Judean wilderness, there are narrow gorges, ravines, and passes where the walls of limestone rise so high and so close together that even at midday, the sky narrows to a pale strip above you, and the floor of the canyon lies in perpetual shadow. These places were feared by shepherds. Predators lurked in the clefts. Flash floods could materialize without warning. The sheep could hear nothing and see nothing. But the shepherd walked into those canyons anyway, because sometimes the path to the best pasture ran through the darkest valley. The rod and the staff were not symbols of comfort in any soft sense. The rod, a short, heavy cudgel worn at the belt, was the shepherd's weapon. It was used to beat off predators, to strike at the head of a snake, to drive away anything that moved against the flock. The staff, a longer walking stick, was used to guide the sheep, to reach out and pull a lamb back from the edge of a cliff, to gently redirect a wandering animal back toward the path. David was not saying that God would remove the valley. He was not saying the enemies would disappear or the darkness would lift. He was saying something far more radical, that the presence of the shepherd within the valley was enough. That the shadow of death was only a shadow, because real death had been taken on by a power far greater than his own. Notice also the stunning grammatical shift that occurs at this precise verse. In the opening lines, David speaks of God in the third person. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores my soul. But in verse 4, at the darkest moment of the poem, the grammar breaks. For you are with me. The moment the valley appears, the distance disappears. It is no longer about him. It is directly, intimately, urgently. You. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. The poem shifts now from the shepherd metaphor to a second metaphor. The feast. The host. The banquet table spread with extravagance. In ancient Near Eastern culture, to prepare a table for someone was to enter into covenant with them, a bond of mutual loyalty and protection. To anoint someone's head with oil was to honor them, to mark them as distinguished, to signal their status as a guest of the highest order. But David places this feast in the most extraordinary location, in the presence of his enemies. Not after the enemies are defeated, not once the danger has passed. Right now, in the middle of the crisis. At Mahanaim, with Absalom's army massing across the Jordan, David declared that the God of the universe was spreading a table and pouring out a cup, not despite the danger, but within it. There is also a parallel here that theologians have long noted. The table in ancient shepherding was also a tableland, a high, flat plateau of rich pasture land that the shepherd would prepare in advance for the flock, clearing it of poisonous plants, checking it for snakes, making it safe. The shepherd went ahead. The shepherd prepared the table. All the sheep had to do was trust the shepherd's work and feed. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The word translated follow in Hebrew is radaf, and it carries a weight of urgency. This is not a gentle trailing, it is a pursuit. Goodness and mercy will chase me down. The same intensity of pursuit that Absalom's army brought, relentless, closing, certain, David now attributed to the covenant love of God. He was being hunted, yes, but the greater hunter was mercy itself. And the psalm ends not with a battle plan or a political strategy or a military calculation. It ends with a house, a dwelling place, an eternal address. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The crisis had not yet resolved when David wrote these words. The battle was still coming. His son was still advancing. What followed in the ancient historical record is one of the most psychologically complex scenes in all of ancient literature. David's generals, Joab, Abishai, Ittai of Gath, marshaled his loyalist forces at Mahanaim and prepared for battle. David himself was forbidden by his men from joining the fight. "You are worth 10,000 of us," they told him. "You must stay in the city." And so, like the cast sheep that could only wait for the shepherd, David stood at the gates of Mahanaim while his armies marched out into the forest. The battle was joined in the forest of Ephraim, dense, treacherous woodland east of the Jordan. The ancient text gives us one of history's most remarkable statistics. The forest itself killed more men that day than the sword did. The terrain swallowed armies whole. Absalom's rebellion, so carefully constructed over 4 years, was dismantled in a single day. And Absalom, the beautiful, treacherous, beloved son, rode his mule beneath the branches of a great oak tree, and his extraordinary hair, the hair that had been his glory and his vanity, caught in the branches and held him there, suspended between heaven and earth. As his mule rode on beneath him, Joab found him and killed him. When the messenger reached David, the old king asked one question, not, "Did we win?" Not, "Is Jerusalem retaken?" He asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And when the answer came back, the warrior king collapsed. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." He was the shepherd who had recovered his kingdom and lost his sheep. This is the paradox at the center of David's story. The God who had led him through the valley had not promised that the journey would be without grief. The table prepared in the presence of enemies was not the same as the elimination of all enemies. The goodness and mercy that pursued him were not identical to the absence of sorrow. The psalm was not a promise that nothing would be lost. It was a promise that nothing would be lost ultimately. That beyond every valley, beyond every shadow, beyond even the death of what was most beloved, the shepherd remained. David returned to Jerusalem. The rebellion collapsed without its charismatic leader. The throne was restored. He lived many more years, years marked by both greatness and failure, by the building of a dynasty and the planning of a temple he would never himself be permitted to construct. He died, the ancient texts tell us, full of years, having gathered an empire and written songs that would outlast every empire ever built. But the 23rd Psalm, written, most likely, in the crucible of his greatest personal crisis, traveled further and lasted longer than anything else he ever made. It traveled with the Hebrew people through the Babylonian exile, when they sat by the rivers of a foreign land and wept for a home they could no longer see. It traveled through the centuries of diaspora and persecution, carried in the memory of communities who had lost everything except their words. It was on the lips of the Jewish communities in medieval Europe, in the camps of the 20th century, in the mouths of prisoners and refugees and the dying. Christian monks carried it into their cave-cut monasteries in the cliffs of Egypt and Syria. Early Christians painted it on the walls of catacombs beneath Rome, the image of a shepherd with a lamb across his shoulders, surrounded by the bones of the martyred dead. Henry Ward Beecher, the 19th century preacher, said of this psalm, "It has charmed more griefs to rest than all the philosophy of the world. It has poured balm and consolation into the heart of the sick, of captives in dungeons, of widows in their pinching griefs, of orphans in their loneliness. Dying soldiers have died easier as it was read to them." Soldiers in the trenches of the First World War whispered it into the mud of Flanders. Hostages in dark rooms have repeated it until the words became a rhythm that kept panic at bay. Doctors and nurses have spoken it into the ears of patients crossing the final threshold. Parents have said it over the beds of their children. There is something here that transcends religion, something that touches the bedrock of what it means to be human, which is to say, vulnerable, which is to say, dependent, which is to say, desperately in need of something stronger than yourself to hold the path through the valley. David knew that need. He had known it on the hillside with the lion. He had known it in the cave at Adullam, surrounded by broken men. He had known it on the road out of Jerusalem, barefoot, weeping, the crown left behind, and he chose, in that moment of complete undoing, not to reach for a weapon or a strategy or a political calculation. He reached for a metaphor. The Lord is my shepherd. 6 words in English, 4 in the original Hebrew, Yahweh Roi, Lo Exa, the Lord shepherds me. I shall lack nothing. A boy who smelled of sheep, who had carried lambs on his shoulders across the Judean hillsides, who had killed lions to protect the weak. He became the greatest king of the ancient world. And when that world collapsed beneath him, the language he reached for was not the language of kings, it was the language of the flock. Because he understood, in the deepest part of himself, that all the power he had ever wielded, all the victories, all the armies, all the golden splendor of Jerusalem had never once made him the shepherd. He had always been the sheep. And the shepherd, the real shepherd, had never once let go. 3,000 years have passed since that night. The limestone hills of Judea still fold and rise above the Dead Sea, unchanged. Somewhere in those ancient gorges, where the walls close in and the sky narrows above to a pale strip of light, a path still runs. It runs through the valley, not around it. And the promise that was true for a barefoot, weeping, broken king on the road out of Jerusalem, it has been tested by more suffering than any of us can count. It has never been found false. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.